Recently, the Tales from the Pizzeria book series came to a close with its 8th installment, and boy did it end with a bang. Except for B72, we don't talk about the tragedy of that story. Its final story, Dittophobia, quite possibly gave us an explanation to what the FNAF 4 nightmares are, still location's placement in the timeline, and gives context to FNAF's most infamous and frustrating minigame, Midnight Motorist. So strap in folks, because this is going to be a big one. If you end up enjoying the video, consider subscribing and liking for more FNAF content in the future. It's appreciated. So to start off with, what happened in Dittophobia? The story starts with a boy named Rory awakening from a disturbance in the night, midnight to be exact. Rory intuitively knew that it was just after midnight. He knew this because every night at about this same time, the same thing happened. Some small unidentifiable noise, maybe a scrape or maybe a tap woke him from a deep sleep. Rory closed his eyes in an attempt to make them disappear, but Rory knew that this was futile. So he opened his eyes to see the monsters lurking in the dark, approaching him from all entrances of the bedroom. From out of the closet, the piercing sharp point of a pirate's hook scythed through the air as the rotting ruin of a fox-shaped creature with multiple rows of jagged teeth creeps out into the room. The fox's eyes shone stark white in the surrounding darkness. Nightmare Foxy. The creature on the right was a decayed version of a yellow chick. Its body so riddled with holes that only the barest hints of a metal skeleton held it together. It has a massive mouth full of spiky teeth. Clutched in the chick's massive hand with long razor-like nails was a bright pink cupcake. Nightmare Chica and Cupcake. Coming from the left. This creature was a monstrous distortion of a purple-blue bunny, complete with long, malted bunny ears that rose above its oversized, open-mouthed face. Nightmare Bunny. Sitting upon his bed, frozen with fear as the monster slowly advanced towards Rory, he found the courage to move, and this was when the final creature appeared. A mutilated brown bear with even larger teeth than those of the other creatures shot up from beneath Rory's bed and blocked his escape. The bear wore a black top hat and a black bow tie. Nightmare Freddy. As the bear's mouth lunged towards Rory, piercing him with his metal teeth, he woke up. Rory's nightmares were of the nightmare animatronics. Rory wakes up in a room all too familiar to us, the FNAF 4 bedroom. His blue-grey furniture, a tall chest of drawers which held a purple three-bladed fan with the lava lamp his uncle had given him, with a shorter dresser that held a yellow porcelain lamp with a grey striped blade. Both pieces of furniture sat against Rory's lavender-grey and white wallpapered walls. Rory had prepared for his school day with neither parent to be found. The shower was always in use, but his mother, father, absent. Once he's ready, he doesn't remember where the front door is. He wanders around desperate to find a way out, then the sun begins to set. Time for bed. It's important to note that there's a constant noise coming from the vents, almost like a hushing sound, which provides Rory some comfort. Upon falling asleep, he is awoken again by the same nightmares at midnight, repeating the cycle until an engine breaks down where Rory wakes up to a 17-year-old version of himself. Rory finds the bedroom in complete disarray. Rory comes to find a secret entrance which leads to a massive bunker. Rory discovers that he was experimented on to see the effects of prolonged induced fear in children using hallucinogenic gases, making him believe he was seeing nightmares, which were in fact just mannequins. Rory's nightmare creature was nothing more than a spooky life-size figurine. It was a costume hung on a flimsy metallic skeleton. It couldn't move on its own. It was transported into Rory's room on rails. Believing he was in his home and a 7-year-old, all of which was from the private room, discovering he has been left in these experiments for 10 years. Rory enters Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, sister location's location, entering the control module, Circus Gallery, Funtime Auditorium, Ballora Gallery with Ballora fully intact, Breaker Room, and the elevator. Rory gets into contact with Wade, a friend from his past who convinces him to go back to the house to try to turn power in the facility back on. When he does find a power generator, he is greeted with an audio cassette at the ready as a precaution. The voice who belonged to William Afton convinces Rory to turn the gas back on because he is safe here. He belongs there. He was taken away because he didn't fit in at school. His father was never around, and mother cared more for appearances than her own son, so he does, and begins believing he is a 7-year-old again, and returns to the nightmares. So yeah, Rory was an experiment victim of William Afton, was trapped in the observation station's FNAF 4 locations in the sister location bunker. So now that the summary is done, let's get into the meat of the video, explanations and speculation. How does Dittophobia explain the nightmares? FNAF 4 was and still is the most obscure and vague game in the franchise, but now with this story, I think we can put some of the mysteries of FNAF 4 to bed. There has always been a debate since the launch of that game on whether or not it was real or a nightmare, and over the years, more information has come out to clarify the debate, and each time the evidence has contradicted the other, though this time Rory's story provides a solid answer. Rory, under the influence of the hallucinogenic gas, believes he is a 7-year-old living in his home fending off nightmares who are in fact mannequins designed to look as such, attached to rails enabling them to move around the house, with Freddy coming from a trapdoor under the bed. This story, I believe, is telling us that the nightmare animatronics are not real animatronics, but are in fact mannequin dolls. Now, am I implying that we'd play as Rory in FNAF 4? No, this in fact wouldn't line up with some details in the game and his survival logbook. In FNAF 4, there is a garbled sound that plays at random during the nights, and if you play it backwards, it's the FNAF 1 Night 1 phone call. Now, how could Rory know this? He wouldn't. But who does? Michael Afton, under the alias Mike Smith. Also, backing up the claim that we play as Mike in FNAF 4 is his drawing of Nightmare Fredbear in the survival logbook, with the faded text asking, "Do you have dreams?" So do we play as Mike experiencing the FNAF 4 nightmares, meaning FNAF 4 was a nightmare? Yes, but it's not that straightforward. You see, while we do play as Mike experiencing the nightmares, it's not in his point of view. That would be his brother's, the crying child. I believe this story tells us the crying child was also experimented on by his own father. Proof of this lies with the Fredbear plush. The crying child's companion during his days, all the while being William's eyes on the child's experiences. Ever wondered why Fredbear's head was a flower, or why he's just chilling in the sewers other than being a reference to it and being everywhere at any given time? Well, I believe this is because Fredbear was used as a surveillance system, watching his every move and to keep him moving and pushing throughout the day. William would communicate with him as a voice of false security, just as he does with Rory at the end of Dittophobia. Damn, if William really did watch the crying child's every move, then he'd let Mike kill his own brother. Need more proof the crying child experienced the experiments? 1. The FNAF 4 house and Fredbear's are labelled as observation stations on the sister location map. And 2. The faded text, who is most likely Cassidy, communicates with Mike in the survival logbook with questions they shouldn't know unless they were either talking to someone who does, and since Cassidy isn't Golden Freddy, it makes sense that the other potential candidate for Golden Freddy to also be there, the crying child. Or at the very least, she has some of their memories, and there is a third party in the survival logbook who talks through older text. So what does this mean? Well, I believe we play as Mike experiencing the FNAF 4 nightmare experiments through the memories of his long-lost brother, possibly after he was injected with Remnant from the Scooper in sister location, as I also believe in Molten MCI, the theory that part of the missing children's spirits are in the Funtime animatronics, except for Baby, who is possessed by Elizabeth Afton, as well as Shadow Victim, the theory that the crying child's memories are scattered amongst the MCI, and the key to their happiest day in FNAF 3, as each minigame references something from FNAF 4, regardless of how Mike gains access to his brother's memories. The Character Encyclopedia, in my opinion at least, has already told us this. On his page it reads, "The crying child is the main character in Five Nights at Freddy's 4. He is terrorized by the nightmare animatronics in his bedroom, but his real story is told in the end of night minigames." On first glance, it would seem like the hit saying he is the FNAF 4 protagonist, and while this is true, it is in fact stating that his real story is told in the end of night minigames, not the night segments. This tells me that in the minigames, we play as the crying child explaining his tragic backstory, and in the night segments, we play in the perspective of the crying child from Mike's dreams. If this is true, then it would explain how he's seen IV bag, pills, and flowers next to the bed, and how the FNAF 1 Night 1 phone call is heard in the background. The story alone together further hints to this idea as well, with its rules for possession, of which will focus on the first one only. 1. You start to have funny dreams and flashes of memories that are not yours. It is like they possess your thoughts when they are near. Sound familiar? I think being injected with one's remnant would in fact cause a spirit to haunt you. Anyway, this segment is long enough. Let's move on to the next. When does sister location take place? From Dittophobia, we know Afton was conducting fear experiments on children to test the powers of emotion and their importance in creating Remnant, the term used to describe paranormal occurrences in FNAF, and as we know, emotion is the key component in creating Remnant. For William to begin his experiments, he would have had some kind of encounter with Remnant, and this encounter was most likely Charlie's possession of the puppet. How would William have known Charlie possessed the puppet after her death? In the security puppet minigame, the puppet has no tear tracks. It's only after the puppet embraces her out in the rain that the tear tracks form, indicating Charlie's possession of the puppet, which can also be seen on the puppet mask in the Blobbing security breach, as they are no longer present, indicating either her soul has moved on or she is no longer possessing the mask, making the puppet's possession William's motivations throughout the rest of the series. As Charlie was killed outside of Fredbear's in what we can presume to be 1983, and William can't have begun his experiments before his discovery of Remnant in the same year, we can assume this is the case because in the private room of Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, the numpad which activates the monitors of the FNAF 4 rooms requires the code 1983, with Rory being trapped in the chambers for 10 years, and before someone says that he feels as though and seems he had aged 10 years in the story itself also brings up multiple times that it has been 10 years, so I believe it's safe to assume that that amount of time has passed, meaning Dittophobia takes place in 1993 at the earliest, the same year FNAF 1 takes place. Not only this, but in the story, if you remember, Rory encounters a ballerina animatronic fully intact. This being Bellora would seem to be telling us the events of Sister Location take place after FNAF 1, finally giving us a time placement for Sister Location in the timeline. But now that we're done with the Sister Location stuff, let's jump into FNAF's most obscure minigame, Midnight Motorist. From a game that was supposed to tie up loose ends, this minigame didn't do a good job at that. For years, this minigame has never had a satisfying answer, but Dittophobia may have just given us the context behind the minigame. If you don't know, Midnight Motorist depicts an orange or mustard man speeding down a crowded highway only to pass through a clearing down a path towards his house on a stormy night, with this banger soundtrack accompanying him. In his house, we meet someone who is related to him in some way, watching TV, but a TV guy says, "Leave him alone tonight, he had a rough day." The mustard man proceeds to ignore the TV guy's request and demands entry into the mysterious person's room. When this demand is not met, he travels to the back of the house only to find a broken window of which he seems to not take any notice of, including the footprints in the mud only, saying, "Run up to that place again, he'll be sorry when he gets back." It's important to note, but before Monster Man's house, there are two alternative paths you can take, one of which is a secret pathway. The first is an establishment named Junior's, of which the man is not allowed entry for some reason, and the other pathway is a plain clearing with a dirt mound. So what was this minigame telling us? I believe Dittophobia establishes that the runaway kid is not Rory, but another one of Afton's experiment victims. Take a listen to this quote from William in the story. "You ran away from home. Don't you remember? You didn't fit in at school, Rory. You couldn't understand the equations in math. You had trouble with your reading, and the girls, Rory. Remember how the girls thought you were Rimpy? You came here because you'd be taken care of here. You have been taken care of here. Here, you're never an outcast. You're never wrong. You've been watched over and cared for. That's something your parents never did, Rory. Remember?" Yes, he remembered. All his parents ever did was work. His dad was never home. His mum was gone most of the time, too, and when she was home, all she ever did was tell him how wrong he was. While this does sound similar to the story behind Midnight Motorist, an abusive father who never cared for the well-being of their son, even when he's run away, though I don't think Rory is the runaway kid, as the circumstances of his kidnapping seem different from the family depicted in Midnight Motorist. Rory was kidnapped and manipulated by Afton because he didn't fit in at school, his parents were never there, with his parents always at work, and whenever his mum was home, she only ever cared for his and their home's appearance. Compare this with Midnight Motorist, where what seems to be the father is an abusive parent with his son or maybe wife or partner showing some form of care for their brother or child. If Rory isn't the Midnight Motorist kid, then who do I think they are? honestly, I don't think it matters who the kid is. All that matters is the context behind the minigame. That being, Afton only kidnaps children from families who are either neglectful or abusive, ones who possibly wouldn't care if their child went missing, or parents that would be potential candidates in their own child's disappearance during police investigations. If Midnight Motorist was about Afton luring a child to take them to his experiment chambers, then it would follow a trend already in the FNAF 6 minigames, with the security puppet minigame being about Afton's first crime, the 3D maze being his second crime, luring Susie into the back room of Freddy's being one of the 5 children to go missing in the MCI, possessing Chica, and Midnight Motorist being about another one of Afton's crimes, the fear experiment. But to dive deeper into why this is the true story behind Midnight Motorist, let's discuss the possibility of the minigame being the night of Charlie's death later that night. If you don't know, the go-to theory was that Midnight Motorist was telling us what happened after William killed Charlie later that night, as the minigame is titled in the game files. Other visual cues include the purple car Mustard Man is driving in, as William drove a purple car just before finding Charlie outside of Fredbear's in a Take Cake to the Children minigame in FNAF 2, driving off shown with the tire tracks in the back alley as shown in the Security Puppet minigame, and both Security Puppet and Midnight Motorist both taking place on a rainy night, making the Mustard Man William Afton. The person watching TV either Mike, as he watched TV in the prior game's sister location, or Mrs. Afton, and the runaway either being the crying child or Mike. The issue with these theories is that none of them were completely satisfying answers. The first theory is the crying child was the runaway. The main issues with this theory is who lured him away in the dirt mound, since at this point in the timeline there would be no possessed animatronics to lure anyone away, and William ain't luring him away if he's Mustard Man. This led people to theorize that Shadow Freddy possibly lured him away, and where would he have lured the crying child to? Charlie's body with the puppet holding her. This would have been what the crying child saw in FNAF 4. Don't you remember what you saw? You know what would happen if he catches you. However, I have a couple issues with Shadow Freddy being the one to lure the crying child away. 1. Isn't Shadow Freddy theorized to be a being comprised of agony, dark remnant, just like Shadow Bonnie? Wouldn't that not make him a physical entity? How could he leave footprints in the ground? Granted, it would explain why there are no footprints leading the crying child away, as Shadow Freddy can teleport and such, and Charlie's death would create agony leading him to be created. But why Freddy? And not the puppet or something. Now, maybe I could be wrong about shadow characters being able to leave physical imprints in the world. Plus, shadow characters have been shown to lure kids to a Freddy's or the Backroom, as shown with the story You're the Band and the FNAF 3 Follow Me minigames. However, I don't believe Shadow Freddy to have been created from Charlie's death. I believe Shadow Freddy is connected to William and his experiments. Upon his death, the crying child may have spawned an agony creature from his agony created from his intense fear of the Fredbear animatronics, and constantly crying, as water is a conductor of emotion depicted in the fourth closet. Upon seeing this, Afton tries to recreate the success of his experiments with the crying child in spawning an agony creature by putting the other children in the same environment as the crying child, while Rory experiences nightmares in the same house as well. In doing so, Shadow Freddy appears as Nightmare, which explains why Nightmare is the final boss of FNAF 4, because in the files of that game, he is labeled as Shadow Freddy, and why Shadow Freddy helps Afton in the Follow Me minigames, luring the animatronics into the back room. While I see the connections, I just don't believe Shadow Freddy was the one to lure the crying child, or the crying child was the runaway to begin with. And finally, second, the Dirt Man. What is this? According to the theory, it's a gravesite for someone, and depending on who you talk to, it could belong to Elizabeth, meaning the Afton experiment started even before Charlie's death, which there is no indication for this being true, or the grave belongs to Mrs. Afton, or it's the entrance to the sister location bunker, or perhaps a twisted animatronic who bury themselves during the day and hunt in the night for Charlie in the Twisted Ones. Well, for this theory, the grave belongs to Mrs. Afton. Can't really be argued against because there is no proof that this is the case other than she isn't in the house, and the Vanessa therapy tapes in Security Breach hinting at the idea she unalived herself after a custody case with William over the children.
Your dad made you follow instructions, didn't he? I'm talking about the custody battle between your mum and your dad. Your dad didn't play fair, did he? He used to make your mum look bad in court. He manipulated you. But it's common for one parent to use their child to hurt the other parent. I know your mum after she lost the custody case.
My issue with this claim is there is really no evidence to prove this. Other than that, yeah, sure, it's possible. Could it be the sister location bunker? Yeah, sure. The Midnight Motorist map matches the map of the FNAF 4 house and Fredbear's family diner as seen on the map of sister location, and the bunker is connected to these locations. However, Dittophobia shows us that the observation rooms are underground with the bunker. If this minigame is after Charlie's death, then After wouldn't have even created the fun times yet, and at this point in the timeline, the bunker wouldn't even exist. Lastly, the mound is a twisted animatronic. This can't be true because in the twisted ones, the animatronics hunt at night and bury themselves during the day, and well, the minigame takes place at night. So let's move on to the other theory. Another popular theory is that Mike was the runaway after the bites of 83. The footprints outside the house belong to Fredbear, the animatronic that the bite victim possibly possesses after his death, beckoning Mike to visit his own grave site. While this would provide an explanation to the footprints and the broken window, there's one small issue with this. In Alone Together, it possibly establishes that spirits don't know that they're dead unless they find their bodies, as Travis does for the story's ending, Finding Peace. Well, I could just say that the crying child would have moved on if he knew where his body was. Charlie seems to have chosen to stay even after possessing the puppet, and seeing her own body means spirits can stay even after they know that they're dead. However, the crying child, presumably in the survivor logbook, is shown as not being able to see. How can he know he's dead if he can't even see? How would he know where his body is? Granted, we couldn't have even possibly come to this conclusion without Alone Together, but with its release, I think it's valid to use this as evidence against this theory. While these are all good theories, they all have some flaws in them, which is why I believe Midnight Motorist to be about an abducted victim of Afton's for his experiments. The child's family was abusive and neglectful, adding on to Afton's crimes as the other minigames do in FNAF 6, and the Mustard Man was never William Afton because he has always been depicted as purple, and anything resembling him, both literally and thematically, has continued to be represented as such. But what about the purple car, the rain, and later that night? Listen, other people would have a purple car. It rains other nights as well, and later that night could be another night, such as the DCI, Dead Children's incident, the bites of 83, or even Elizabeth's death if you believe Afton to be the Mustard Man. Yeah, I know there are flaws in my belief as well. However, this is just what I believe, and you can form your own opinions. This is what just makes more sense to me. Later that night refers to what happened after Afton kidnapped a child from a neglectful family. What, expected a perfect answer for this minigame? Sorry, it's Midnight Motorist. There really is no perfect or completely satisfying answer. Clickbait thumbnail, clickbait thumbnail. Sorry about that. So, I believe with Dittophobia, Scott was providing us with the context behind Midnight Motorist with Afton's manipulation of Rory. But just quickly, I wanted to share that Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare are not in the story. I believe this is because Nightmare is not a character created by Afton, but is the result of his actions.
I am your wickedness, made of flesh.
While Nightmare Fredbear could possibly have been used to frighten the crying child further, and the fact that Nightmare Fredbear was drawn in the survival logbook and his appearance in Help Wanted seems to indicate that he was a real character at some point. Well, that's it. We've reached the end. If you've made it to the end, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, consider subscribing, tapping the bell, and liking the video if you want to see more content like this in the future. I also have a Twitter at SethAnxiety, so you can follow me there if you'd like. Thanks, and enjoy your day/evening.